Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Rule of Law Education Center's podcast. Today, we'll be discussing the recent Trump indictment, how it came about, and why he is being prosecuted. Specifically, the former president is facing 4 separate indictments in 4 different American jurisdictions. However, we will today focus on the charges he's facing in the state of Georgia. Trump is facing several charges here alongside 18 other defendants, some of which include his former lawyers, Trump administration officials, and other individuals who perpetuated the narrative of the 2020 stolen election and election fraud. The case is only in its preliminary stages, however, it already has very clear implications for the rule of law and governance in America, and perhaps even Australia too. We will examine the consequences of attempts of those in positions of authority to act above the law and abuse their power for personal gain, at the expense of truth, democracy, and the rule of law. So, firstly, some background. The indictment surrounds former President Donald Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 American presidential election results, which he lost to Joe Biden, the current US president. The defendants, which includes Trump, are facing a whopping 41 charges in the Georgia indictment. The state has charged them with acting as a sort of criminal organization who engaged in various criminal acts, which includes perjury, conspiracy, racketeering, and so on. 13 of the 41 charges are against Trump personally. These charges are related to his denial of the 2020 election outcome, specifically focusing on the actions of Trump and his supporters in attempting to overturn his election loss in Georgia. In this state, it was a really tight race for the 16 electoral votes that Georgia has in the Electoral College, and Biden won by a very narrow margin of 0.23%. Part of the evidence surrounds a phone call the former president had with Georgia's Secretary of State, Republican Brad Raffensperger, on January 2, 2021, where Trump asked him to, quote, find 11,780 votes so that he could win the state. Additionally, which is quite surprising, Trump is accused of convening a group of fake electors in Georgia who would meet at the state's capital to fraudulently certify Trump as the winner of the state's presidential election. The indictment repeats that all of the alleged activities that Trump and his allies engaged in were overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. So this case is occurring among the backdrop of the beginnings of the new American presidential election, in which Trump is participating and is a serious frontrunner for the Republican Party's nomination. It has led to increasing tensions as Trump and his supporters look to use his legal battles to bolster support for him against the supposed persecution he is facing. What we're focusing on today is the implications this case has for the rule of law in America and more broadly also. The rule of law means that no one is above the law, and moreover, when a powerful individual tries to abuse their position, they are held to account by social processes and the legal system. Even a former US president, one of the highest offices of power in America, should not be above the law. We will explore what this means shortly. On various social media platforms, Trump has rallied his supporters by describing the 2020 election as fraudulent and using his position to legitimize those claims. Furthermore, he has made vague threats of violence, and many of his actions point towards attempts to destabilize American democracy through twisting the truth and dividing the country along very strict political lines, all to maintain his power and influence. So far, all we have is the indictment and some other pretrial processes and appeals that are being undertaken by both the defense and prosecution, and it is likely the case won't start for a while, with the date being set later on. I think it is worth emphasizing that all of these charges are still allegations at this stage. Importantly, Trump is still entitled to the presumption of innocence afforded to all accused individuals in the American legal system. He is not guilty of any of the charges unless found so by a jury. So, the elements or principles of the rule of law that are most relevant to the Georgia indictment and that we'll be discussing today are 1. Presumption of innocence, 2. Fair and prompt trials, and 3. No one is above the law. Firstly, as we mentioned before, all of the defendants in the indictment have a right to the presumption of innocence. They should not be considered guilty of the charges before the trial has taken place or the outcome has been reached. We live in a world of rapid news and information sharing, with the ability for any individuals or media organization to record events and quickly distribute materials and data. Additionally, when discussing such controversial figures or issues such as the Georgia indictment and the Trump administration, the media can be used as a powerful tool to influence members of society to believe one side or another. However, in order to maintain the rule of law in this situation, we must not jump to conclusions and instead keep an open mind about the case. Evidence provided by the indictment and news sources may lead us to believe in Trump and his allies' guilt before the trial has begun. However, they are still entitled to the presumption of innocence and should be afforded this rule of law protection in order to preserve fairness and equality in the justice system. Although the defendants in this case could be considered quite wealthy and relatively powerful and well connected, it is still important that they have the chance to defend themselves against the allegations and that the prosecution has the entire burden to prove their guilt. Secondly, as we discussed previously, preliminary activities have begun for the 2024 American presidential election. Notably, the events being discussed by the Georgia indictment occurred either at the end of 2020 or beginning of 2021. This raises issues for the rule of law principle of fair and prompt trials, as it is now towards the end of 2023 and the trial is only anticipated to begin sometime in early 2024. The accused individuals in this case are entitled to a trial that is appropriate in length and occurs promptly relative to when the charges are laid and to when the alleged acts occurred. However, it is worth noting that in this case, Trump has explicitly waived his right to a speedy trial, as is afforded by Georgia's legal system. But some defendants have filed demands for a speedy trial for themselves, which means the cases will be severed to try the different accused individuals as they have requested. This right provided by Georgia's justice system helps strengthen the rule of law protections upheld in this case by enabling the defendants to request a prompt trial to increase fairness for themselves. Lastly, the concept that no one is above the law forms a large part of what we understand the rule of law principle to be, and can be traced back to as early as the Magna Carta in 1215. This forms a large part of the charge of the indictment, as Trump and his allies are accused of disobeying the law, and the whole case revolves around Trump using his position of power at the time, as President of the USA, to attempt to influence the outcome of the 2020 election. If this is true, then he and his co-defendants acted above the law, and the rule of law is threatened when individuals in authority abuse their positions in this way. Thus, the outcome of this trial will have clear implications for how the rule of law operated during the circumstances of the 2020 election. Additionally, if the accused are found guilty and punished, then the rule of law will be protected and supported through holding these individuals accountable for their actions. This case has the potential to also affect Australia, which we will now briefly discuss. As a relatively small nation, we are influenced by events that occur around the world, particularly by actions and events that occur in powerful countries such as the USA. This is especially apparent because they are a close ally of Australia, and historically we have had quite strong ties in many ways, such as socially. Because of this, erosions of the rule of law in America have the potential to affect our way of thinking about our own democratic principles, liberties, and freedoms. There are very significant differences in the two countries' governance structures and operations, but any demonstrations of abuse of power can have flow-on effects for our society, and particularly for those in power in Australia. It should be noted, though, that the USA, being such a large country, has the capacity to influence many countries around the world with ties to them, especially if there are instances where the rule of law is disregarded or applied loosely. Therefore, the potential for the Georgia indictment to affect Australian society and governance should not be quickly dismissed as only affecting or relevant to America. Additionally, it is worth noting that with the tumultuous nature of America's politics at the moment, particularly regarding their upcoming election in 2024, it can be really hard to dissect the key issues of the rule of law principles and understand where the line is crossed into politicized actions and genuine abuses of power and threats to democracy. For example, Trump's former Vice President Mike Pence is currently campaigning to be the Republican presidential candidate for the next election, so his statements on Trump's actions during the 2020 election and words about no one being above the law or the Constitution, made with reference to the former president, must be taken with a grain of salt and carefully considered in context. So, with this in mind, our discussion about Trump's criminal indictments in Georgia has come to an end. Hopefully, the relevance of this situation is clear to you. Namely, that those in positions of authority who abuse their power need to be held to account to preserve democracy, the rule of law, and society as a whole. If they are not, especially in today's polarized world with so much misinformation, it can be a slippery slope into the mistreatment of individuals and breach of citizens' personal rights and freedoms. For more information about the rule of law, please visit the Rule of Law Education Center's website for educational resources and to discover more about the importance of liberty and democracy in our society.